It is clear that B'nai B'rith is an abject tool of British intelligence. It is run and directed to serve the interests of British imperial policy, and not the interests of Jews, nor even of B'nai B'rith members. The one peculiarity of B'nai B'rith, in comparison to the other organizations launched by Palmerston and his three stooges, is that B'nai B'rith will be used for a wider variety of tasks in various countries and epochs. Therefore, B'nai B'rith will be more permanent in its continuous organization than many of its Mazzinian counterparts, among which it stands out as the most specialized. At the end of this 19th century, one of the tasks assigned to B'nai B'rith will be to direct, with the help of other Mazzinian agents, the dismemberment and partition of the Ottoman Turkish Empire. This is the state the British like to call the sick man of Europe. Historically, the Ottoman Empire has often offered surprising tolerance to its ethnic minorities. To blow up the empire, that will have to be changed into brutal racial oppression on the Mazzini model. In 1862, during the time of the American Civil War, Mazzini will call on all his agents anywhere near Russia to foment revolt as a way to cause trouble for Alexander II. A little later, with the help of Young Poland, Mazzini will start a Young Ottoman movement, starting from an Adam Smith translation project in Paris. In 1876, the Young Ottomans will briefly seize power in Constantinople. They will put an end to a debt moratorium introduced by the previous government. They will pay the British, declare free trade, and bring in Anglo-American bankers. They will quickly be overthrown, but the same network will soon make a comeback as the Young Turks, and their rule will finally destroy the Ottoman Empire.
In 1908, the Committee for Union and Progress, better known as the Young Turks, carried out a military coup, overthrew the Sultan, and took power in the Ottoman Turkish Empire. Once in power, they carried out a racist campaign of suppressing all non-Turkish minorities. Within 4 years of coming into power, their anti-minority campaigns had provoked the Balkan Wars of 1912-1913 among Turkey, Greece, Bulgaria, and Serbia. By 1914, these wars had triggered World War I, with Turkey becoming an ally of Germany. Within 7 years of coming into power, the Young Turks had destroyed the Ottoman Empire. British intelligence had manipulated every nationalist group in the empire, both the Young Turks and their opponents. When the Young Turks took power, the Ottoman Empire still included Syria, Iraq, Jordan, Palestine, and the Arabian Peninsula. The empire still included much of the Balkans, half of Greece, half of Bulgaria, half of Serbia, and all of Albania were still part of the empire. The Ottoman Empire is shown here in yellow. As you can see, it was much bigger than present-day Turkey. The dark areas were part of the British Empire. The hatched area was Russian. Although most of the population of the Ottoman Empire were Turks, there were a large number of Slavs, Greeks, Arabs, Armenians, and Kurds. The Ottoman Empire was a multi-ethnic empire, as were the nearby Austrian and Russian empires. When the Young Turks came into power, they were waving the banner of democracy, but they soon picked up the banner of pan-Turkism. This map shows what they called the pan-Turkic homeland. As you see here, the idea was to form a state that included all the Turkic peoples of Asia. Now, since half of these people lived in Russia, this policy necessarily meant a collision with Russia. But pan-Turkism was not created by the Young Turks or even in Turkey. It was first called for in the 1860s by a Hungarian Zionist named Arminius van Bree, who had become an advisor to the Sultan, but who secretly worked for Lord Palmerston and the British Foreign Office. Van Bree later tried to broker a deal between the Zionist leader Theodor Herzl and the Sultan over the creation of Israel. The Young Turks also raised the banner of a pan-Islamic state. The idea was to bring all Muslim peoples of the world into one empire, whether or not they were Turkish. This was another goal that necessarily meant conflict with Russia. This idea also was not created by the Young Turks or even in Turkey. It was first called for in the 1870s by an English nobleman named Wilfrid Blunt, whose family had created the Bank of England. Blunt was a top British intelligence official who advocated using Islam to destroy Russia. Blunt's family later patronized the British KGB spy Kim Philby. While the Young Turks were pushing the pan-Turkic and pan-Islamic movements, the British were also boosting all the anti-Turkish independence movements within the empire. They were supporting Arab nationalism, led by Lawrence of Arabia. They were supporting Serbian nationalism, led by the British agent Seton Watson, Albanian nationalism, led by Lady Dunham, and Bulgarian nationalism, led by Noel Buxton of Oxford. All these peoples wanted to break free from the Ottoman Empire, but they also all claimed the land of their neighbors. For example, the British supported the idea of carving a greater Armenia out of Turkey, Iran, and Russia. This is Greater Armenia. This Greater Armenia had no possibility of ever existing. None of the powers, including Britain, wanted it. They didn't really want it. The Kurds who lived in the same area didn't want it. But the British told the Armenians that they supported the Armenian plans. However, at the same time, the British were also telling the Kurds, who lived in the same region, that they supported the idea of Greater Kurdistan, as you see here. And as you see, Greater Kurdistan and Greater Armenia are almost identical. Now, in 1915, during World War I, the Kurds killed about 1 million Armenians. The Young Turks, who had been put in power by the British, used the Kurds, who thought they had the support of the British, to slaughter the Armenians, who also thought they had the support of the British. The British then used this genocide as a justification for trying to eliminate Turkey. In fact, the next year, the British and French got together to plan the division of the Ottoman Empire between themselves. Here is the plan. What would become Turkey is indicated in yellow. According to this plan, which only partially succeeded, Turkey itself would be reduced to a tiny area on the Black Sea, and the rest of the empire would go to Britain and France in order to avenge the killing of the Armenians. Now, who were these Young Turks who so efficiently destroyed the empire? Well, the founder of the Young Turks was an Italian B'nai B'rith official named Emanuel Carasso. Carasso set up the Young Turk Secret Society in the 1890s in Salonika, then part of Turkey and now part of Greece. Carasso was also the Grand Master of an Italian Masonic lodge there called Macedonia Resurrected. The lodge was the headquarters of the Young Turks, and all the Young Turk leadership were members of this lodge. The Italian Masonic lodges in the Ottoman Empire, of which Macedonia Resurrected was a leading example, had been set up by a follower of Guiseppi Mazzini named Emanuel Veneziano, who was also a leader of the B'nai B'rith's European affiliate, the Universal Israelite Alliance. During the Young Turk regime, Carasso continued to play a leading role. He met with the Sultan to tell him when he was overthrown. He was in charge of putting the Sultan under house arrest. He ran the Young Turk intelligence network in the Balkans, and he was in charge of all food supplies in the empire during World War I. Now, another important area was the press. While in power, the Young Turks ran several newspapers, including one, appropriately enough, entitled The Young Turk. Its editor was none other than the Russian Zionist leader, Vladimir Jabotinsky. Here we see Jabotinsky a few years later in the British Army in World War I. Now, Jabotinsky had been educated as a young man in Italy. He later describes Mazzini's ideas as the basis for the Zionist movement. Jabotinsky arrived in Turkey shortly after the Young Turks seized power to take over the paper. The paper was owned by a member of the Turkish cabinet, but it was funded by the Russian Zionist Federation and managed by B'nai B'rith. The editorial policy of this paper, the Young Turk, was overseen by a Dutch Zionist named Jacob Kahn, who happened to be the personal banker of the King and Queen of the Netherlands. Jabotinsky later created the most anti-Arab of all the Zionist organizations, the Irgun. His followers in Israel today are the ones most violently opposed to the Perez-Arafat peace accords. Now, another associate of Carasso was Alexander Helfand, better known as Parvis, the financier of the 1905 and 1917 Russian revolutions. Here we see Parvis with Leon Trotsky in Russia in 1905. Shortly after this picture was taken, Parvis moved to Turkey, where he became the economics editor of another Young Turk newspaper called the Turkish Homeland. Parvis became a business partner of Carasso in the grain trade and an arms supplier to the Turkish army during the Balkan Wars. He later returned to Europe to arrange the secret train that took Lenin back to Russia in 1917. Well, of course, there were also some Turks who helped lead this Young Turk movement. A few. This is one, for example, Talat Pasha. Talat was the interior minister and the dictator of the regime during World War I. He had been a member of Carasso's Italian Masonic Lodge in Salonika. 1 year prior to the 1908 coup, Talat became the Grand Master of the Scottish Rite Masons in the Ottoman Empire. And if you go to the Scottish Rite headquarters in Washington, D.C. today, you can find that most of the Young Turk leaders were officials in the Scottish Rite. But who founded the Scottish Rite in Turkey? Well, one of the founders was the Grand Master of the Scottish Rite in France, Adolphe Crémieux, who also happened to be the head of the B'nai B'rith's European affiliate. Now, Crémieux had been a leader of Mazzini's Young France and helped put the British stooge Napoleon III into power. Well, you can only find the story of the Young Turks in the B'nai B'rith and Scottish Rite archives. You can't find it in the history books. The best public account, however, is found in a novel, a British novel called Green Mantle, whose hero was a British spy who secretly led the Young Turks. Carasso does appear in this novel under the name Caruso. The author, John Buchan, who was a British intelligence official in World War I, later identified the novel's hero as Aubrey Herbert. In real life, Herbert was from one of the most powerful noble families in England. In fact, his family held no less than 4 earldoms. His repeated contact with Carasso and other Young Turk leaders is a matter of public record. Herbert's grandfather had been a patron of Mazzini and died leading revolutionary mobs in Italy in 1848. His father was in charge of British Masonry in the 1880s and 1890s. His uncle was the British ambassador to the United States. During World War I, Herbert was the top British spy master in the Middle East, and Lawrence of Arabia later identified Herbert, who was his boss, as having been, at one time, the real head of the Young Turks. Well, the U.S. State Department also played a role in the conspiracy. From 1890 through World War I, there were 3 U.S. ambassadors to Turkey, all of whom were in close contact with the Young Turks. One was Oscar Strauss, another was Abraham Elkin, and the third was Henry Morgenthau. All 3 were close friends of Simon Wolf, and all 3 were top officials in the B'nai B'rith.
It is clear that B'nai B'rith is an abject tool of British intelligence. It is run and directed to serve the interests of British imperial policy, and not the interests of Jews, nor even of various countries and epochs. Therefore, B'nai B'rith will be more permanent in its continuous organization than many of its Mazzinian counterparts, among which it stands out as the most specialized. At the end of this 19th century, one of the tasks assigned to B'nai B'rith will be to direct, with the help of other Mazzinian agents, the dismemberment and partition of the Ottoman Turkish Empire. This is the state the British like to call the sick man of Europe. Historically, the Ottoman Empire has often offered surprising tolerance to its ethnic minorities. To blow up the empire, that will have to be changed into brutal racial members. The one peculiarity of B'nai B'rith, in comparison to the other organizations launched by Palmerston and his three stooges, is that B'nai B'rith will be used for a wider variety of tasks